Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Welcome to Dig on America, where we speak truth to power. Every week, we give you the dig on how American history, policies, and media created the social and political issues we face today. DOA is independent media supported by listeners, but they'll tell you we're just fake news, deep state propaganda, funded by George Soros, the Clinton Foundation, BLM Marxists, and
Foghorn Leghorn.
Mark Henry, World's Strongest Man.
Oh, yeah. Chocolate Thunder.
Chocolate Thunder.
Chocolate Thunder.
He did that impossible like dumbbell thing.
Yeah, that was, he actually was the world's strongest man. And by the way, speaking of wrestlers, should have mentioned this last week. Rest in peace, Scott Hall, Razor Ramon. I'm forgetting, he has another name. I can't remember what it is. I got to look it up because it's like the silliest wrestler name of all time. It is, oh my God. I'm losing my mind.
Standard to hurdle.
Diamond Stud.
That's not the one. That's not the one that I'm thinking of.
Texas Scott, the American Starship Coyote Razor.
Yeah, that's it. Starship Coyote.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Starship Coyote. I mean, I want to go by the name Starship Coyote. That's like, I am stealing that since he cannot sue me anymore. Of course, Vince McMahon probably owns it somehow.
What would you do if I told you, Dutch, that there was a possibility in a reality where your name was already Starship Karaoke?
I would be so excited
for like video games. I mean, if it's not taken, I feel like somebody ought to pick that up.
Starship Coyote for Congress 2022, right below us. Welcome into Dig on America. This is Jason Dutch. That fella is Michelangelo Vapor Inquisitor Extraordinaire Famine. And with us today, Big Haas will be, I'm sure, joining us any moment, as he usually does when he gets done getting the softball team into beast mode. But with us again today, second time on the show, we have our good pal. He is a constitutional attorney, not a congressional attorney like I called him last time. He is a DJ and he is a beast. Shahid Buttar, what's up, my friend?
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
He's the Idris Elba of candidates. What doesn't he do?
That's very.
I don't know what he doesn't do. Okay, so
I can't draw to save my life. If that helps.
You say draw or drum?
Draw. I can drum.
Draw.
See, I knew he could drum. I could tell. He's got drummer energy about him.
He's got drummer's eyes.
I've never heard that before.
That's racist.
That is the first time anyone ever said that to me.
It's so innocuous that I could instantly turn that into a, that's probably racist, Dutch.
He's
got drummer eyes.
His eyes smell of Starship Coyote.
They're a regular Starship Coyote.
But serious question though, like, and I'm not gonna hold WWE accountable for like everything, but like, at what point do you start taking some level of responsibility? Like, these aren't even a surprise anymore when these guys die. You know what I mean? And like, these are like my fucking heroes from when my childhood, like the 80s and 90s. It's sad.
Can you clarify what you mean?
Well, I mean, you have how long can we go on listing wrestlers who have died? Some of them have died from, car accidents and drug overdoses and stuff like that. But like, there has got to be a correlation here. And I don't know if it's CTE or just the lifestyle or whatever. But like Vince McMahon, he's got to get, I would think if I was Vince McMahon, I tweeted this out last week, that I would be like, maybe I should look and see if there's something that we have to do with this, because I'm really getting tired of sending out these, condolence tweets. You know what I mean? Like it's like every other day there's somebody, and obviously it's not every other day, but is
that not just a symptom of you getting older? I mean,
no,
your parents likely went through the same thing where a lot of celebrities started going out at the same time.
Y'all are rough to each other. Can I just say that?
I'm just saying. I feel the same way. I feel like everybody that I know is dying. But then when I was a kid, People were dying at the same rate. I just didn't know. I didn't have any idea who they were.
Are
What
you
I
Vince
was
McMahon's
thinking when you were
attorney?
talking was about the NFL. Like that debate started in football.
Yeah.
But you're right that it's interesting that somehow it hasn't reached to other sports. And I frankly have never thought about the extent to which
Wrestling.
recent deaths are correlated to sports injuries in wrestling. But you know,
Yeah.
I do think there's been a reckoning with respect to player rights, not very dissimilar from worker rights in other industries. And like there's definitely, you know, a thread to pull on there. But I don't think that looking to the owner of the league is the, you know, fruitful opportunity for accountability. Ultimately look to the players to organize themselves, and the wrestlers in this case, right, to stand together for their interests. I mean, I think that's what the lesson we could learn from this wave.
I'm not sure if they have that like they do in the other sports. You know what I mean? Because it's not a sport, really.
Right.
I mean, like technically speaking,
It's
wrestling
stunts.
is not
It's
a
stunts.
sport.
But
Yes.
I mean, but the Screen Actors Guild takes care of stuntmen.
Yeah.
There you go.
Where is the
that's
thing for
most analogous.
wrestlers?
Right. If anything,
You
they
know.
need it more. Because workplace safety, in addition to, you know, unions don't just protect wages. Workplace safety is a big piece of this. When you talk about the Screen Actors Guild, there's that film that now I can't remember who it was on. Some bigwig was on a film outside LA. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was, you know, that was people working outside the union apparatus who were overworked and undertrained. Exactly what you would expect.
Yeah. By the way, since people just joined the show, Shahid, introduce yourself if you would. Just take 30 seconds and give the people your spiel.
Word.
Your snake oil salesman spiel.
My name's Shahid Buttar. I'm a lawyer and an artist. I live in San Francisco. I'm challenging Nancy Pelosi for her seat in the House of Representatives on a platform emphasizing climate justice and human rights. I spent 20 years in the nonprofit arena, particularly fighting the surveillance state. I also had a hand in defending campaign finance reform and helping establish marriage equality for LGBTQ couples. I fought from the streets to the halls of Congress without a seat. I was arrested in 2015 for an act of journalism. And I've just watched up close and personal in slow motion the train wreck of the last generation in Washington. And I pay too much attention to sit on my hands and simply criticize from the sidelines. I see my city represented by an oligarch who's been an impediment to every progressive policy goal of the last generation. And I'm eager to offer San Francisco a more sincere voice representing our city in Washington.
How do you really feel about Nancy Pelosi? So
I didn't get into the corruption. That was the nice thing.
So, all right. Last time you were on the show, we played our game with you, which is 4 Down Territory. I think we still want to play that for those who have tuned in, but we're gonna shotgun. I think we'll shotgun through it kind of quick. So I'll just ask you.
I remember this game now.
Yeah. I'll just ask you real quick. So again, let me call an audible. San Francisco 49, 41, 43, 49.
You forgot the rapper from San Francisco.
I don't know any rappers from San Francisco, but Too Short is from Oakland.
I was about to say, you could have said anything. I would have been like, checks out, because I have no idea.
Now I come from the Oakland town. No, it's Too Short. So Too Short.
Oakland has a heavier rep, but SF's got our history for sure. I was just with a few the other night.
All right. Well, there's my first question then on the 4 Down Territory. Again, for those just tuning in, or maybe you haven't seen the show before, we're going to ask him 4 questions. He's going to give us 4 answers. These are not political. Your favorite San Francisco rapper?
My favorite San Francisco rapper is Crypto. And it's not just because of his beats. I'll lay it out there. The thing I saw him for the other night was a memorial that he and his homies organized. Not just him. I mean, there's an entire community of folks who are keeping the memory alive of not just Alex Nieto, one young man who was gunned down by the San Francisco Police Department, but an entire unfortunate community of them. And I particularly would just shout out artists who organize. And it's one thing to represent revolution on the microphone, and that's important, but to be about it and to spend one's time off the microphone and out of the studio organizing in the community, that is real AF. Shout out to all the MCs everywhere who do it. He does a good job of it. And I'm proud of that brother for sure. And the beats are dope.
Dope beats.
So he's Gemini's from there. Forgot what my question was going to be. I started down this rabbit hole of looking up Bay Area rappers, and I'm like deep into the Wikipedia. Okay.
Well, that's okay.
I remember it now.
No, I remember. We'll do a podcast.
I remember.
Okay.
If you had to choose one Ninja Turtle to be, who would you be?
Wow.
See,
I feel like I should have studied for this one. I want to say Donatello. Is he the one who has the two sai swords, the two little mini sai swords? The one who
that's
has
Raph.
that.
That's
Pardon?
Raphael.
That's Raphael. Okay, yeah. I think like that would be the most interesting weaponry among the ones that they.
The fighter.
Yeah.
The scrapper. The enforcer.
I play capoeira, so I feel like that would be particularly well adapted to like.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Okay.
Certain techniques, you might say.
PlayStation or Xbox?
I've never had either. I knew that if I got
disenfranchise. Wait, Shahid. You get to. This is a question where you disenfranchise half of your voter base or all of them. Okay.
No, I get it. I appreciate the trap. I was just gonna say I can't ever contemplate owning either. When I was younger, I knew that if I got one of those, I would basically, it'd be the end of like law school or what have you. And yeah, I can't go near them with a 10-foot pole. But I had a roommate who helped design one of the systems on the Xbox, so I'm kind of partial to that, just on account of his work history. So I'll say that.
I like
Very
it.
well done.
That was
Also, I'll say Xbox is routinely. I've been at DEF CON. It's a hacker conference in Las Vegas, and I was impressed to see Xboxes there. And I've never seen a PlayStation repurposed this way, but Xboxes were being used basically as they were like hacking the software on them and then using them to their own purposes unrelated to gaming. And so that degree of sort of repurposability seems, worth something.
Cool.
All right, my last one, best burger.
I feel like my answer should be funnier somehow. I don't know.
You're fine.
Sorry, guys. I'm just answering questions.
No, they're actual answers. We do just make fun of people's answers, but they're not answering. But you're actually answering them, so it's giving us less to make fun of. Lie a little, would you? So we could bring an answer out.
I'm trying to play that game. I'm not really into it.
Who's got the best burger in the Bay?
Ooh, when you said to lie, I was just thinking about it. There's a PBS Frontline special about Pelosi, and so I could say something hagiographic about her. But the best burger in the Bay? Oh man. I'm not a big burger person. If I may just politely invite you to reframe the question as the best burrito in San Francisco, because you can get a burger anywhere, but like if you're going to come to San Francisco, get a burrito in the Mission. And I would particularly shout out, I think I'll go with the original El Farolito, which is off 24th Street. Not the one that's open late that everybody goes to, but the original one was pretty dope. Buen Sabor and Castillito as all good runners up. But yeah, if you have not had a burrito in San Francisco before, you might not have lived yet, and I would encourage you to put it on your list.
I like a good burrito.
They'll rock your socks off, and they're enormous. I mean, it's like 3 meals in one.
What a politician! I mean, you are shined already. It's ridiculous.
I can see myself in him.
Donald Trump, he's like, I'm not going to answer questions about this topic, but I will talk about my rally. It's like, no, I'm going to tell you about burritos. Okay, so screw your question, Mikey.
I nailed it.
So awesome. So I think what might be the cool way to start, and for those joining in, we're going to talk in the second hour. We're going to talk about the Keystone Pipeline. The first hour of the show, or the first 40 minutes or so of the show, I should say, is going to be here with Shahid, and we're going to talk to him a little bit about his campaign, get to know him again. He's been on the show before, so if you want to go back, that episode was probably about 8 months ago, and it's back in our back catalog, so you can see some more about him. But Shahid is a progressive, and he has asked us to play a short video. I think it's like 2 minutes. So if Mikey is prepared to do that, we will start out with that, though. We will pause it at one point, though, because we are connected like Kevin Bacon to this video. So
if it wasn't for us, this video would have never happened. Just saying.
Exactly. And you don't even know that, Shahid. So how you like how you like the map?
Wait for the reveal. I'm so curious.
Yes.
History tells us that asking nicely doesn't work. To effect change, we need to rise up and fight. We've seen the campaign promises, virtue signaling, strongly worded statements, symbolic gestures, and voting alone won't save us. We're on to the establishment's tricks, their excuses and roadblocks and rotating villains. and we're done compromising our human rights. A revolution is happening under our feet. Decades of prosperity for the oligarchs and crushing austerity for everyone else have lit a fire inside all of us. And this time, we're not going to let them put it out.
I fucking quit.
Is that the person who's been on your show, the woman who quit her job?
That's the one who reads our intro thing.
Right on. I'm so excited. I know it's funny. So first of all,
Shauna.
to her. What's her name?
Shauna.
Rock on. Thank you. I'm glad that you're connected to her. We saw that clip and we had a whole discussion about like, does this make sense to include in the video or not? Because it doesn't relate to our campaign in any way. And we had a pretty universal feeling of like, hell yeah, we want that clip in here because it speaks to the rage I think that so many people are feeling. And yeah. I'm impressed that she is a good moment to capture.
Yeah, she so the quick story on that is when that happened, it was actually a few months after it happened. Okay. It went re-viral, right? It went viral a second time. And I think because TYT played it or something. Okay. And you know, they're always so early to the game. Sorry to our friends at TYT, Ravana and Jackson. We love you guys. But the people on Twitter were commenting, this bitch will never have a job again, you know, that sort of thing. So we were like, okay. So we called her up and hired her to do our promo, you know what I mean? And it turns out she didn't even really need our help, you know, because she was doing just fine, but she liked the idea anyway. So she came on the show. She's a super cool chick. And actually one of the funniest moments of this podcast, remember she roasted us? She was just like,
oh yeah.
When she signed off, Mikey was clever enough to tell her, give us a Walmart fuck you to us. Like, so she roasted all three of us and then clicked off the podcast. So it was funny.
Right on. She's clearly a strong woman.
Mikey's genius.
I used to drink a lot back then, dude. That's hilarious. What a great idea.
Yep. All right.
But the video goes on.
That's why right now we're seeing lost strategies reaching beyond traditional politics, using the tools of grassroots movements that overcame obstacles in the past. Focused objectives, clear demands, broad-based organizing, building a genuine threat to the establishment, using every tool in the box and leveraging every point of pressure and power. I'm not willing to play along. I've spent 20 years fighting on the outside as an activist, direct action organizer, and constitutional lawyer, forcing change on a system that concedes nothing without a demand. I've fought for causes that weren't popular at the time. I've raised my voice when others remained silent, and I've challenged powerful figures to whom others have conveniently deferred. I've helped win struggles for justice, like marriage equality for same-sex couples, guarding religious freedom from the FBI, and blocking the secret acquisition of military spy technology by local police around the country. I can't be bought. I've walked away from money and access and job security because I'm unwilling to compromise our principles. I'm not a politician. I don't toe a party line. Both parties created a system that is thoroughly corrupt, and it will take people with the independence and courage to challenge it for anything to change. Humanity has been waiting for too damned long. It's our time, people. Let's go.
Shahid for Congress 2022.
Let's go, Brandon. Oh, you're on mute, Shahid.
Thank you. I forgot how the YouTube autoplay thing actually
I know
shot at the end.
And next is a video about kittens. I will say my biggest takeaway from that video is the many stages of Shahid's hairdos.
I did keep track in my head. I was like, I haven't seen that one yet. Oh wow, that's an older one. Okay.
The irony is I shaved my head for the 10 years following the 9/11 attacks, but it was at a phase in my career when I wasn't nearly as visible. Like nobody invited me on shows or anything, so we don't have any particular videos of me in that era. So most people over the course of my organizing would know me as the guy who was bald, basically. So we didn't even capture that. But yeah, there's a lot of. I've been doing this a long time.
I like bald. I want to be friends with bald Shahid.
Well, I've said before. Sorry, go ahead, Mikey.
How does one even take that? I want to be friends with bald Shahid. Like, what do you mean when you say these things to people? Like, that's a real person you just said.
No, I take it as endearing because what I hear you saying is that, you know, everybody knows me for my hair, and you know, I'm sure there's going to be a time in my life when I might not have it, and I hear that Jason's going to be there for me. You know,
I will.
even if
I will
don't
be
have
there.
the blood to go with my
I'll be
hair.
with you.
You're right, Dutch. He is good. Damn.
I'll be with you. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. Last time you were here,
Yeah.
you talked about Nancy Pelosi. So you ran against her before. I personally have a lot of debates with Democrats. And I would say I'm closer to progressive than, you know, probably most blue dogs and stuff like that would be. There's still, I have my right wing leanings, you know, with guns and stuff like that. But I'm just not a big fan of Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden. You know, that's not to say that I think Biden's a shitty president. I think he's doing actually really, really well for the most part. However, Pelosi, I get into these debates with people, Shahid, and they tell me all the time that she's a master litigator. You know, she only brings votes to the floor that are going to win.
Right.
You know, she did the thing with, like you had in your video, with the bow or with the kneeling with the with the Kente cloth on. Kente cloth,
Yeah.
am I saying it right?
Yeah.
And you know, I'm like, well, why is she in front of these black women? And like, yeah, that's a minor thing maybe, but like, so give us like, and last week's show was on the ratchet effect. I don't know if you had a chance to see that or not.
I didn't see the show, but I'm familiar with the effect. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we went through the ratchet effect. Like, so take 5-6 minutes or so here if you want, and just kind of give us the dig on why you think, you know, is the ratchet effect a real thing, and how Pelosi plays into that, and how that's inspiring your run, if that's an appropriate question.
Sure.
So, and kind of like what happened the last couple of times. So you have the floor for
Well,
for a
do you want me to address our race in the last cycle, or do you want me to address?
I want you to address whatever you feel
Yeah.
like is relevant. Yeah.
Great. So let's start with why I ran, which is basically the corruption of an establishment and the cult of personality that protects not just Russian oligarchs and not just right-wing figures in the United States from grassroots accountability. Nancy Pelosi is the head of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives. She is widely credited, as you described, for her supposed mastery. What her mastery is theater and the stock market. She has inflated her wealth massively over the last generation, and she has clearly prioritized her stock portfolio because the American people have seen none of the growth economically that is accrued to the top 1%. And this is a figure who has engineered repeated tax breaks for the wealthy while freezing the federal minimum wage for over a decade. Someone who's engaged in congressional insider trading over and over again and repeatedly benefited the industries in which she invests, which is to say corrupting both the marketplace and federal policymaking at once in order to fill her pockets at the public's expense. This is a figure who has not debated an opponent since she went to Washington in a special election in 1987. And when you have wealthy politicians growing more wealthy while doing things like blocking the House from even voting on universal health care long enjoyed by every other industrialized country in the world, doing things like denying Representative Ocasio-Cortez the seat on the Energy and Commerce Committee that she could have used to develop the Green New Deal and help craft a response to a mounting global catastrophe that threatens the existence of our species. When you see wealthy politicians growing richer in office while blocking those kinds of reforms, while funding every war for profit over the last generation, participating in the CIA cover-up over torture, I could go on. The dimensions of corruption surrounding this particular figure and the office that she has held over the last decade is astounding. What particularly amazes me is that her mastery of political theater confuses and apparently works on so many journalists. There's an entire class of people, an entire profession, journalism, that we rely on in democracies to inform the public about what is happening, for instance, in government. And the entire field of journalism in the United States appears to be asleep at the switch. And I would particularly say that surrounding the crisis in Ukraine, but I would, in a longer time slice, and to reflect on your question about the ratchet effect, Nancy Pelosi and the way that she is constructed in the public consciousness is a perfect example of it. So let's just rewind the tape and look over the 4 years of the Trump administration. Pelosi was routinely constructed by major media outlets as supposedly fighting the Trump administration based on acts of theater, like ripping up one of his speeches that she invited him to give, or, for instance, pointing sternly at him across a table, or putting on her sunglasses while walking out of a meeting. All of that is theater, because at every turn she enabled that president. She funded every one of his military budget increases. She expanded his surveillance authority, expanded his corporate trade agreements authority. She slow-walked the impeachment processes and then affirmatively hamstrung both of them. And I didn't say this after the fact. I called this well before she did both of those things, and I knew where it was going. And frankly, the same things that would have brought him down, she couldn't invoke because they would have brought her down too. Self-enrichment at the public's expense is a constitutional violation. And here's the point: that is thoroughly bipartisan. And when I look at Washington and I look at our city's voice in Washington, I see not just systemic problems, but I see a rack of problems, particularly enforced by a very powerful, ultimately conservative voice on policy, representing a very progressive city. And again, I pay too much attention to be fooled. And while I understand many journalists are, I'm grateful for the ones who aren't, like yourselves. And I'm eager to offer my city, again, a voice that stood for human rights. When Nancy Pelosi was funding Bush's wars, I was in the streets trying to stop them. When she was slow walking rights for LGBTQ couples, I was in court as a baby lawyer fighting for the rights of my gay neighbors to have families and enter marriages with the partners of their choice. When she was blocking immigrant rights, I was working in Washington, leading a nonprofit, working to try to guard not just immigrant rights, but particularly the privacy rights of all Americans from the surveillance apparatus built to try to detect and remove immigrants. At every stage that I've seen her impede the future, I've done what I can as a grassroots activist, as a lawyer, as a nonprofit advocate to fight from the other side. And my campaign is basically an extension of that commitment.
Excuse me. Yeah, I can't say that I disagree with too much of that. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe that Nancy Pelosi is what you might call a conservative member of the Democratic Party?
Oh, yeah, there's no question. Her policy record makes it inescapably clear. She brands herself as a progressive, but on issues from climate, healthcare, spending priorities, government secrecy versus transparency, the full accounting rules like the pay-go rules. I mean, I could go on all day. That she would have to lean over backward to find an example of any progressive commitment. And all of the, she would cite things like HR1, the voting rights bill, which she had plenty of cover on. She shows up for issues basically after they're not contested anymore, and then will crow about victories that she ultimately spent years impeding. That is her MO. And journalists don't see through the ruse. They give her credit for things that she actively tries to block. And then when they overcome her resistance, she claims credit for them. And then that's the narrative.
That's the thing that I don't mean to step on you, but I just have to say, the media runs fucking cover for her and Manchin and Biden, and
no question.
Just the fact that Biden was able to overtake Bernie as quickly as he did. Part of that, at least, a lot of that goes to Clyburn, right? But part of that at least goes to the media coverage of it, right? Like, people don't realize that Trump got 87% of the coverage from MSNBC during the 2016 election. Media coverage means something, and Pelosi is covered. She has the same beloved donors as the Republicans, but the media treats her like she's some sort of hero. Now, I don't think she's a demon woman or like evil or anything like that. I just think that she's on the side of big business. I mean, am I on the right track?
I would absolutely agree with that. Though I would add some sauce, if I may, to the pasta, as it were. You're absolutely right that she's on the side of this big business, but I want to tug on that to stay within the metaphor, maybe the piece of spaghetti, and see where it leads. So when you're
pasta, let's go. Come on, feed me.
Kind of stay within the metaphor, right? Okay, so she's a wealthy politician. She's worth over $200 million. Her individual stock portfolio. And we're basically going to explore here what congressional insider trading means and why it's so problematic. For a wealthy person to oversee industries, as Congress inevitably does in crafting regulations or choosing not to, for instance, are they serving the public or are they serving their stock portfolios? And, healthcare is a perfect example of this. We're the only country in the world that doesn't have universal healthcare. One reason why is because it benefits health insurance industries and the pharmaceutical industry in particular. Those are industries in which many members of Congress invest. Even if they aren't invested in them directly and they invest in index funds, they have indirect interests in those industries. And so they have conflicts of interest. Conflicts that mere disclosure cannot resolve. Conflicts that, frankly, appear in the underlying eventual policy results in every area of federal policymaking. From spending priorities, are we going to spend money on weapons or education? Well, which one can you monetize with an industrial complex in which members of Congress are invested? Right. So to favor big business as a wealthy policymaker is in itself corrupt. And when we think about the structural levers that entrench that corruption, congressional insider trading is a particularly indefensibly direct one. When you think about lobbying by corporate interests after people win elections, like that's at least arguably indirect, because the corporations have to hire lawyers to then write their laws to then pitch to these members of Congress. But when you have the policymakers themselves investing in companies that they then oversee or don't because they have allegiances to the companies before their constituents, that's a problem. It is, frankly, how the climate catastrophe happened. There's been no shortage of alarms for a generation that this is a crisis that has been building in, unfortunately, not very slow motion. And Congress has done a big fat job of nothing in response to it. Absolutely nothing. All we've done in the last generation is reassert and double down on our commitment to fossil fuels. Yes, there have been, the emergence of renewable energy, and that's important. And there have been tinkering at the margins, like the incentives to people to, solarize their like home power arrays, and like that's all encouraging. But it's drops in a bucket, right? I mean, the scale of transformation that we have to undertake is massive, and it has not happened because we've had gatekeepers filling their pockets. And so to favor business interests, I think, is much worse than a mere ideological inclination. And it's frankly, it's not even just corruption. Like it's corruption in the sense of self-dealing. I think it's positively harmful to the future. And the science would back that up. When I say believe science, I don't just mean it as a convenient canard to then abandon at the first, hint of where it threatens my interests. And that's how the Democratic Party uses it. When they say believe science, they don't believe science at all, because if they did, they would have made a lot of very different choices over the last 20 years. And their failure to make those choices ultimately compels accountability. And that's why I'm here.
So basically, it sounds like you're saying you're not talking about Democrats, liberals. You're talking about the party.
I mean, actually, the party and frankly, both parties, because it's not just Democrats. When we look at the fossil fuel addiction that is racing humanity off a cliff, that is a bipartisan commitment. And it's pervaded not just domestic policy, but U.S. foreign policy. For the last 70 years, it's why we keep toppling democracies everywhere one emerges around the world and tries to restrain the military-industrial complex from sucking the oil out from underneath it. We go to war, or we engage a coup, or we send the CIA to do something else nefarious. That's our pattern in this country. And it's all been and it's not like we didn't have a U.S. president to warn us that this was going to happen on national television in 1961. Like that actually happened. And he warned us. Eisenhower said all this was going to happen unless we were knowledgeable and alert. And then you see journalists getting spoon-fed these lies by corporate politicians. And how knowledgeable or alert is the citizenry while the military-industrial complex has been shredding our rights and liberties and democracy, not only in America, but around the world for generations. I care too much about democracy and future generations to sit by seeing what I have and what I understand to be happening and just letting it go by. And I think enough other Americans, and certainly enough other San Franciscans, I think, share the same concerns, that together I'm quite confident we can do something about it. I see a lot of nihilism setting in across the body politic. You referenced, for instance, the 2020 presidential election and Bernie's race. And I see so many voices that are otherwise insightful internalize from that set of events some form of hopelessness, which is the problem. I would just paraphrase FDR here, which is that the disengagement, the nihilism is the thing that will drive us off the cliff.
Yeah.
And the fact that and I think it tends to be a result of people being kind of new to politics, because having been here and having fought for these principles for 20 years, we've gained more ground in the last 5 years than we had in the preceding 15. But a lot of people who only look at the layer of politics above the waterline are like, oh, Bernie's not in office, this game's rigged, forget politics. And it's just like, it makes me want to tear out my hair and be like, come on, people, look up. We weren't talking about Medicare for all in 2014. It wasn't even in the public discussion. And granted, it's pretty far back now, and that's a whole conversation we can have about virtue signaling in Washington. But the fact of the matter that it's become an object of public discussion, that is a victory. It's not the victory. We have more we have to win yet, right? But you don't win victories by refusing to acknowledge the ones that you've actually achieved. When in 2020, when I ran against Pelosi, we forced her to shift on 6 different issues. And yeah, I didn't win the seat, but I won 81,000 votes, and no one had ever come close to that before. So we won more votes than anybody had. I forced her on 6 different policies to change not just her vote, but the outcome in the House of Representatives. So like for me to internalize defeat in a year when I did each of those things would just be senseless, frankly. And then there are enough forces in the world, mostly corporate Democrats, who are being like, you lost, why are you here again? I pay too much attention. I see the victories that we're winning. And I think it's, when I say self-marginalizing, I don't mean to me, I mean for the movement. It is self-marginalizing to overlook our victories. And it's important to acknowledge as a movement where we've gained ground. And the fact that there's a bipartisan majority across the United States that favors universal health care is a victory in itself. And it is frankly a reflection of the corruption in Washington that we don't have that consensus reflected in policy yet. But to walk away from the political process because it is unresponsive simply reinforces its unresponsiveness and plays into ultimately the problem.
Yeah. So one thing that was in the video, and I think you touched on it last time you were with us, is you were part of, like, it went too fast in the video. It was something about the surveillance from the NSA that they were trying to give to police departments. Can you just go over that again for new listeners? Maybe they're unfamiliar.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I've worked on lots of different fronts in the struggle to defend privacy, association, and freedom of thought and conscience from government surveillance. I've worked at the federal level to try to restrain the NSA and the FBI, separate programs spanning a decade. I've worked at the local and the state level across the country to impose the first restrictions on the surveillance state, and that's the particular intersection you were asking about here. So one of the ways that the surveillance state emerges is through what I describe as sort of like the high-tech operation of the 3-letter agencies in Washington: the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, the NCIS. I could go on. The ODNI. There's like a whole alphabet soup here. The NCTC,
NWA,
the WWF, to stay within our earlier
DOA.
See, I can say something funny. I can be funny if I really work on it. It's hard for me, right? Because I pay too much attention. It's hard to there's a true genius in making political comedy. And I will say that I've tried my hand at a little bit, and I have gotten positive feedback from Ron Falcone and Graham Elwood in particular. I have a whole riff on indefinite detention that I managed to tragically make funny, and I'll save that for another time. But
the next time we have you on the show.
I appreciate that, but now I went and derailed myself. I don't remember what we were even talking about.
NSA, we were talking about the alphabet soup of the agencies.
And so that's one side of the surveillance sort of pincer. The other side, if that's the high-tech surveillance, the low-tech surveillance is state and local police. There are over 1 million of them around the country. And when you put a body camera, for instance, on every police officer, what you've effectively done is subjected the entire country to physical video monitoring through 1 million different points of collection. And that's part of the agenda and apparatus. And, the body cameras are complicated because they're framed in the public as if they're police accountability devices, which they are marginally. They're much more mass surveillance devices, but just sidestepping that for now, and we can dig in if you're interested. The point here is that police gain lots of different kinds of very sophisticated, often military grade spy technologies, from the kind of tools to intercept cell phone traffic to the kind of tools to automate the collection of license plate data from neighborhoods across the country. And I've seen devices used to infiltrate cell phone networks, used by local police to do things like track down undocumented immigrants. We've seen transit systems use license plate readers to those devices, even in sanctuary cities. And this invasion of local communities by the surveillance state through the secret acquisition and completely unaccountable use of military-grade spy technologies by local police departments has not only extended the surveillance state into communities across the United States, but also created a vital pathway for accountability and organizing. And so that's what I did for the last 10 years, was organize coalitions in communities across the United States, from Hartford, Connecticut to Berkeley, California, that took action to hold police accountable, particularly by putting in place, where we started winning in 2017, I think is when we started winning the first of these. It might have been 2016, but we started winning structures in communities, particularly here on the West Coast, but some on the East Coast as well, that force police departments to go to elected officials like a board of supervisors or a city council to seek their permission before just taking whatever the feds are offering. And in that process, they have to go through a publicly transparent process to define what the policy will be, whether they can use it, for instance, in First Amendment settings, how often they have to report to the civilian authority about when they've used it and under what circumstances, and has it led to how many arrests or not. Accountability provisions, basically. And you could think of this as surveillance versus privacy. In this context, we haven't even gotten to that front. What these laws simply represent is secret, unaccountable fiat versus democracy and checks and balances. And it's a foot in the door to fight for more. And I'm proud of having won that set of victories, from Santa Clara County, California, to here in San Francisco, to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I'm eager to see what other stations that train might reach. But ultimately, beyond fighting at the margin for these kinds of processes, I would like to put affirmative restrictions on the entirety, not just the local procurement, but the federal agencies too. And that's the only way you can do that, is from Congress. And that's ultimately why I'm running for Congress, is because I've done everything one can as an advocate, as a writer, as a litigator, at the local level, at the state level, to restrain these things. And the only way to meaningfully guard freedom of conscience from our three-letter agencies, from the very same military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us to fear, is to get people like me in Congress. And that's why I'm here.
So essentially what you're saying is, though, if I get, I park out in front of, who do I want to make fun of? Burger King. Looking at you, Burger King. So I'm parked out front of Burger King. I'm about to go get me a large fry, because the fries are actually not as bad as people say that they are. I grab the fries, and then a cop has driven past me. I'm not in the car, nothing like that. Someone in Washington now knows that my car is in this Burger King at this location. So pretty much just, is it like,
it's worse than that. It's worse than that. So,
oh no,
sorry. Well, so I'll give it to you this way. There was a case, and this actually worked out well. It was one of the few cases where the Supreme Court showed up for privacy. It's a Fourth Amendment case, U.S. versus Jones. And it ruled that the police can't, without a warrant, which means, and we'll come back to what that means in a minute, they cannot conduct long-term GPS monitoring of somebody's electronic devices, or in this case, their car, by planting a device on it without a warrant. The point here is that it's not just a single individual data point that is collected. That is collected too, but the problem is patterns. You could infer, for instance, from outside whose house is your car parked between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m. on the weekend? Who are your paramours? Or who are you, from your phone call records, the analogous sorts of things is, who do you rely on? Who are your friends? It's not just where were you. There's associational data behind it. If there's a big labor rally, let's say, and the police want to go back and see, okay, well, what were the license plates that showed up in the 3 blocks surrounding the Union Hall between these 4 hours on the night preceding the event? That's the kind of data that these kinds of tools enable. And people look at it through the lens of public safety, forgetting, first of all, that police are not there to keep anybody safe. Police are there to protect property. Ultimately, that's their job. It's always been their job. Whatever is property is what they protect. People is what they kill. or at least dark-skinned people,
Right.
powerless people. And when we look at these tools through how they are actually used, we are talking about power protection. And that's the problem. That is a danger not just to communities of color, not just to low-income Americans. It's a danger to democracy ultimately, and our constitutional rights. And so that's what animates my resistance to the surveillance state. The victories that we've won, again, are just beachheads, process requirements, a foot in the door for communities to fight for more. And I should be honest here, in many of the communities where we've established these opportunities to fight for more, there is a lot more work that needs to be done. You know, we established the beachhead, and then it seems that in many of these communities, there is not nearly as much focus as we would wish there to be as advocates on the implementation and the continuing oversight of these mechanisms, of the way these tools are used, and the surveillance functions that they're employed in, whether that's national security one day and drug interdiction the next, racial profiling one day, and now immigration enforcement the next. Like, a lot of that's, you know, it leaks. And the only way to make sure it doesn't leak from the local level is civilian oversight. At the federal level, it takes members of Congress who give a damn. And again, I've done one role, and now I'm trying to move into the other.
So one other thing you mentioned earlier today was, and I wrote it down. Can you perhaps help people like us who do shows like this, where we get to talk to people who have massively impressive works, and they have bright futures ahead of them, and they're going to go on to the next thing? What are some better things for journalists and podcasters? What are better questions that they should ask? Because when they try to and then I hate this, and this is why I don't really watch any news programs anymore, because it ruins my questioning for when I have to have the conversation with Shahid, right? If I hear CNN's take on Shahid, I'd rather just talk to you first. But I think a lot of podcasters watch all of the big name things, try to find somebody to talk about it, and they repeat the same question that they heard from. So what would you kind of encourage people to lean on in those situations?
So one simple mnemonic that I think any journalist can keep in the back of their head and always resort to if questions are elusive is follow the money. And in the context of this congressional insider trading scandal that has finally emerged after lurking in plain sight for decades, is where is the money, so to speak? In other words, if you've got a politician on your program, it's worth asking them, what are you invested in? How has it influenced your policymaking? And if you've profited off of insider trading in the past, will you return those gains to the public somehow? And no one's asking any of those questions. I haven't heard anyone anywhere ever ask any of the vulture capitalists masquerading as policymakers if they intend to make the market whole. And none of the proposals in Congress even contemplate the possibility. There was supposed to be a hearing about this. In fact, I think that was supposed to be today. Yeah. The chair of the committee, Representative Zolofkin, caught COVID, so the hearing was delayed, which, you know, I'm sure it will happen at some point. But when it happens, I would like there to be a proposal that might encompass the compensation to the market by the ill-gotten gains by these policymakers. That hasn't been discussed. I think other questions in that arena, for instance, people are concerned about insider trading because, again, it's a direct conflict of interest. There are others. So other questions, for instance, that you might ask a politician if you have one on your show is, you know, who's the last corporation that briefed your staff? And have you ever taken a bill pre-drafted from a corporate law firm at the behest of a private client and introduced it under your aegis as a policymaker? I think that's a question that very few policymakers would be able to say.
Let me turn that around and bring that question to you. Have you, sir? No.
For better or worse, I'm not serving yet. But in all honesty, I want to respond to your question sincerely. There are plenty of bills that, like the ACLU has crafted, that I would frankly like to take to Congress. And there are nonprofit equivalents to those corporate lobbying entities. And so the nonprofit arena that I came from, I know a lot of colleagues who've frankly been working on very insightful kinds of proposals to do things like tighten the antitrust enforcement of big tech companies. I would love to do that. I'm very eager to hold tech companies accountable for not just putting their profits before the public interest, but also giving the government keys to the internet.
Yep. Exactly.
right? I mean, there's a whole range of places in which policy has unfortunately deferred to Wall Street. And if, you know, again, we could be here all day listing one after another way in which that's happened. Ultimately, I aim to unwind as many of those as I can. And I think the key to that is to recognize, first of all, where the deference emerges. Some of them are very obvious. Like today, I think it was Bernie introduced a set of bills that would overturn the statutory exemption from antitrust regulation that the Major League Baseball enjoys. Many other sports leagues also have similar exemptions. There's no justifiable basis for any of them. And so each of those areas where we have a policy that simply favors capital over people, it's as simple as Congress mustering a majority to overturn the policy. And then there's the further art, I think, emerges in detecting the lurking deference, right? So when we have, for instance, a healthcare regime that allows people to access only emergency care as a matter of right, that is a deference to Wall Street, and we should recognize it as such, and we should respond accordingly.
Yep. You I fucking love this guy. So like so here's something funny that I'm taking away from what you're saying is you're talking a lot about privacy. You're talking a lot about like Facebook and stuff like that. And over the last, especially since COVID, conservatives are now screaming this stuff like it's like the same talking points, different end game, right?
Yeah.
Different reasons for it, because they're like, oh, we never had a problem with this stuff, but now they're tracking, you know, middle-class white people. So, you know, it's not now it's dangerous, right? But
change feet.
I tell people all the time, like, especially when like during COVID, a lot of Republicans were ripping on the medical industry, right? And saying it is this astonishing shift from I want to be able to pick my own doctor to doctors are putting magnets in the vaccine. Like, right. Like it was this overnight Candace Owens like switch. And they're like, you know, they're talking about big tech and like, yeah, we were railing on big tech in 2016 when we found out that there was a Facebook employee who was working at the Trump, or was it the other way around? I forget. There was a Trump office within Facebook, or Facebook office within Trump's place. I forget which one it was, you know, and that Facebook was using, what was it? Not the Daily Beast, the Daily Caller as like one of their fact checking organizations. And it's like, we've been saying this for 5-6 years. Bernie's been saying it for 10, right? But now they're saying it. And I'm like, hey, welcome to the party. I'm super glad to have you on the team as far as like trying to break down this big money, because they're so anti-tech and anti-medical industry right now. And it's like, it's astonishing that this came out of nowhere. And they think they're the first ones to the game. And I'm like, we've been literally screaming this for a long, long time. And it's funny when they say it, because it kind of seems like more conspiracy theorist to me, because I'm biased, right? Like I have my biases, and some of it is because it is, but I don't know if you've noticed that a lot, but like, you know, it's now they're coming together on this weird alliance between communists and MAGA on Ukraine, which I think is a little bit strange. Yeah. But I don't know if you've noticed that dynamic, that like now conservatives are saying this and they think that this is like original thought. Like, no, progressives have been saying this like literally forever and for the right reasons. Right. So
I don't disagree, though. You know, if I were to offer a different framing, I think even progressives have been slow to this. The people who were talking about this first were Black communities and anti-war activists 50 years ago who were being subjected to infiltration by the FBI in the COINTELPRO era.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Right? I mean, the people who brought this to the public were literally a bunch of hippies who broke into an FBI office outside Philadelphia during the Ali Frazier fight in 1971, broke open the filing cabinet. This is like pre-computers, right? Like paper filing cabinet.
What is this paper?
Right. This technology you speak of. And they drove it to Washington, 2 hours away, dropped it on the desk of Mike Gravel. And that's how we know that the FBI was infiltrating groups across the United States for 50 years without admitting it. And like that.
Dutch is a cop.
Dutch is a cop. I'm absolutely a cop, but I want to ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
And I know TJ's got a couple questions for you in the chat. We know you got to run. Your definition of like when people talk about like socialism as being the scary term, and I don't want to presume what you know or believe or where you stand specifically, but like, what is your definition of like what a democratic socialist is? How would you explain that to a conservative who might be listening to the show, who's like, who thinks Pelosi is a socialist too?
Yeah. Well, I'll describe the difference between socialism and capitalism. Socialism is when we take care of each other. Capitalism is when we compete for everything. Capitalism is when you eat what you kill. Socialism is when you get what you need. And you can work for more if you want it. That's that simple. Too many people at the moment don't get what they need. They don't get the healthcare they need. They don't get the educational opportunities they need. They don't get the nutritious food that they need. They don't get anything that they need, right? And in a capitalist system where property rules everything, we see the way, for instance, that public safety gets constructed behind these weaponized paramilitary predatory agencies. I was just at a memorial 2 nights ago for a young man who we lost in our community. It's exactly that dynamic, right? Whereas in a socialist framework, if people are at the center instead of property of our social calculus, instead of making decisions that center the interests of pharmaceutical companies and health insurance companies, we might do the simple same thing and say, if you need a doctor or if you need medicine, you should get it. Go figure. That's not complicated. And by virtue of that, every other country that's done that pays less, gets better outcomes. The country in the world that by far has lost the most people to COVID is the United States of America. And there's only one country in the industrialized world that denies healthcare as a human right. The United States of America. Those two data points are not particularly circumstantial.
Yeah,
There's a direct relationship between them.
You wouldn't call that a would you call universal health care, single payer, whatever you want to call it, like this drastic move towards socialism? Because I look at it as just like a tiny baby step in the right direction. It's not even necessarily to me a socialist thing, because there's nobody thinks of Japan as socialist.
Right. It's a socialist policy, but when we talk about capitalism or socialism, it's about a lot more than just a policy, right? Capitalism
means of production
is well, yeah, it's about the means of production. Ultimately, it's about what does public policy serve? Does it serve capital or does it serve people? And everything in our policy arena is constructed to serve capital. Everything. And that's a reflection of capitalism. From the fact that members of Congress can trade insider stocks, that's a pretty clear commitment to capital, a particularly obvious one. The fact that you can, for instance, deduct your mortgage interest payments from your taxes, but not your rent, is a clear discrimination in favor of capital against people. Another one of those class regarding things that we have to look beyond the text to recognize the discrimination and the way
Exactly.
the distributive choice, right? And so these are all choices in policy that we can unwind. Okay. And I would like to unwind. And frankly, we need to send people to Washington with an inclination to unwind those sorts of inequities, and people with a history of doing it. And that's why, again, I'm auditioning for this role, because I see Pelosi having unfortunately done nothing in that arena. But to get back to your point about socialism, capitalism, how they relate, it's no system in the world is a perfect reflection of either of those systems. We have plenty of socialist policies in the United States. The U.S. Postal Service is a socialist institution, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. It's being dismantled by capitalists as we speak, but it was for decades, frankly, for over a century, it was a socialist institution of which Americans were justifiably proud.
Yep. All we have left are the roads. I mean, it's and would you agree that there's really never been a true socialist country? Because I don't really ever see an actual example of what, like, people say it doesn't work, but like you've never really had a true capitalist country either, I think, to be fair. But what's the closest to socialism that we have out there right now? Like, what country would you say is the closest?
Cuba would make a vying contender for it, but the challenge with Cuba is the civil liberties restrictions, which again are frankly a response to capital, because if the CIA didn't try to murder Fidel dozens of times, maybe they wouldn't have created a surveillance state, who knows. But socialism, if it were practiced sincerely, would not only entail a distributed ownership of the means of production, but it would also entail robust individual and communitarian rights. And
Right.
that's the mix that we haven't seen. And that's largely a result, frankly, of security culture responding to Western capitalist aggression. It's not unfair to note that most of the socialist experiments in the world have ended because the CIA had a hand in ending them. That is actually true for more of them than not. And that's a sad comment on not just socialism, but frankly, it's a sadder comment on our country and the thinness of our commitment to democracy. If we really cared about democracy, we'd support it, whatever the decisions of other countries might be. But we've never privileged democracy in our foreign policy. We have always privileged capitalism. It's why we have defended dictators when they are friendly to our interests. It's because they are dictators who are willing to give us oil, or buy our weapons. And those are bad decisions. Those are bad reasons to support dictators. We should be supporting democracy, whatever the democracies decide. And that's an important principle.
You just hit on the most, and I know Mikey's going to talk and he's got comments, that you just hit on the most important point. Authoritarianism is bad. I think we can agree, right? The democratic socialism that we're looking for down the road, I think, a few decades away, maybe 100 years, is hopefully sooner, but this country moves slow, is like power to the people through the ballot box and getting these things done, not an authoritarian figure at the top. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, absolutely. If any tendency towards authoritarianism will always turn towards capital eventually. And that there's a principle there to discern from history. Authoritarianism always begets privilege. It just gets mediated across different, becomes party patronage instead of capital. But the hierarchy that authoritarianism imposes and invites and entrenches is a priori bad. Whatever emerges from it is problematic as a process. And yeah, I'm very deeply, existentially, you might say, committed to democracy. It's why I'm here. I love
this fucking guy. Love him. Mikey, you got a whole bunch, Mikey. Give yourself.
I know we've been falling behind, so I'm going to try and get through these quickly. This is from Aisla, dear friend of the show, part of the Bicurian podcast. No, put him back up there. He's got to answer. How can we support you in your race? I mean, beyond the generic money and voting. I'm not in San Francisco. I just shared and tagged a human I know there. But what else are you looking for? One thing this week that would make a difference in your campaign goals. Stop touching buttons. Get your hands off of it. Put your hands down, Dutch. Jesus, sit on your hands.
Hey, how do you know I wasn't?
Gross.
Thank you for that question. It was much appreciated. Yeah, donating helps. Sharing our content helps. If there was one thing I'd encourage someone to do, it's sign up to volunteer on our site. You can do it wherever you're at. There's lots of ways, not just from phone banking or text banking, things like organizing a Zoom conference to introduce us to half a dozen of your friends who might be interested in phone banking. We're building a movement composed, frankly, of activists from across the country. Every one of the 50 states is involved, and we're eager to involve anybody who shares this commitment to challenging corporate rule. I recognize that we are in a small corner of the world. San Francisco is a city of under 1 million people. But we have this insanely heavy presence in Washington. When Joe Biden gave the State of the Union speech, each of the two women standing behind him and sitting behind him were from San Francisco, Kamala Harris and Nancy Pelosi. It's not a metropolis. We're not even the biggest city in California. And we're not even in the top 3. And like the idea that this city has this kind of weight in the nation's capital and it's being bent in this kind of way, it doesn't take a lot to flip it. When we were making phone calls for Bernie, we were calling across entire states. It doesn't take that much to flip a congressional district in the grand scheme of things. And we know we have the votes here because we saw how people voted in the presidential primary. More of them voted for Bernie and Liz than for the other candidates. So if we can just educate San Francisco enough about the reality of Nancy Pelosi's history and the alternative that we present, I know the votes are there. It will take an army of people making those phone calls and following up on those introductions and educating my neighbors. But that's what I'm here for. And we've got a small one coming together. And I would love to include any of your listeners who share that commitment to the future.
Okay. Pelosi enables the GOP in order to continue to create the polarization that fills her pockets. She also says she isn't invested in solving our problems. They make her and her buddies, including her buddies across the aisle, to end them and lose her cash cow. Here's one from WIL 1447. Hi, you're new here. If elected, could you work across the political aisle and find common ground with conservatives? And if so, what does that common ground entail?
I see one issue that's ripe for that collaboration is the legalization of cannabis at the federal layer. So long overdue, and it would change a great many things. The long-standing industry in California has been to some extent destroyed because of the slowness of the pace in federalization, because people can't access banking services. It basically means that small producers are getting squeezed out, and you're seeing the corporatization of this sector that was never corporatized before. So cannabis is one area of collaboration. Another one is civil liberties. So restraining the surveillance state is an area where, frankly, there is some transpartisan opportunity. When I led the Bill of Rights Defense Committee from 2010 to 2015, much of the support for our work came from libertarian inclined Republicans. I was a socialist then, and I was fighting the Obama administration from the left, but it just so happened, to the point that you were raising earlier, Dutch, at the time, the people who tended to see through the partisan ruse were predictably the ones on the other side of the partisan fence. And as the administration in Washington changes and the policy paradigm remains the same, predictably, the grassroots response to it tends to flip. So when it was Trump in office, it tended to be Democrats who were outraged by the DHS goon squads, the paramilitaries who were suppressing dissent in communities like Portland and Kenosha, responding to unaccountable police violence in our communities. And when it's Biden in office or Obama in office, suddenly Democrats don't care about mass incarceration or mass surveillance or military industrial corruption or drone strikes or indefinite detention.
You don't say.
Folks. These issues, all of these civil liberties issues, are ones that draw together Americans of very diverse ideologies. You don't have to agree on how we're going to spend our money, which is ultimately what a lot of the distinction between left and right comes down to simply agree that we should not be torturing people, and torturers should go to prison and not be on the Supreme Court, like Brett Kavanaugh. Don't get me started about that guy. I should say, as long as I'm with you, and given the events in Washington this week, that I'm really excited about the nomination of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, and I do hope that she's confirmed. It's not just the case that she'd be the first Black woman on the court and the first public defender. The court, as it's currently constituted, is stacked with veterans of the executive branch, and they have structurally compromised and undermined judicial independence. And no one's reporting on her nomination from this standpoint. The court has a hole in it that, frankly, she alone isn't even poised to fill by herself. We need a bunch of justices who are public defenders in order to balance the court. But she would be the first, hopefully, of more, and I'm very eager to see her confirmed.
All right, one from a young man named T.J. John Stone. How come the squad doesn't author legislation? Seems all theatrics.
Whoo-wee. Okay. I'll do this. I'll take the most obvious answer here is that Nancy Pelosi denies committee assignments to the ones who need them the most. So AOC's principal vision when getting to Congress was the Green New Deal. The committee that would have given her a chance to develop that vision into policy was the Energy and Commerce Committee. And there is a very powerful Democrat, the Speaker of the House, she represents my city, who denied her that seat, particularly in order to give it to someone, Kathleen Rice, who didn't even support Pelosi for the speakership, which AOC did. And just to think about that, what it basically means is that the corporate center run by Pelosi is responding to the squad with all elbows and knees. And the squad, with the handful of votes that they have in the House, are trying to get by while they're getting steamrolled by the corporate establishment. Yeah. And I see a lot of people in the grassroots blaming the squad. And frankly, I could see any number of things I wish that they would do differently, perhaps like endorse challengers to the incumbents who have their boots on their necks, like Pelosi does. And they've declined to do that. So I see them as, frankly, weaker than I wish they were. But at the same time, I also see that the corporate establishment they are contending against, that they are confronting, is much more powerful than most people in the grassroots perceive. And I know this, having confronted it. I've encountered demagoguery from Democrats worse than any amount of racism I've ever encountered from Republicans. And, it's not like I've always lived in liberal enclaves. I grew up in rural Missouri, and I've spent time in Salt Lake City and Houston and Washington, D.C. Never have I encountered the kind of public institutional white supremacy as I have in San Francisco's Democratic Party, the very body that sent Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris to Washington. And if I may just address
and Dianne Feinstein, for that matter.
And Dianne Feinstein, absolutely.
Who's like the most corporate conservative member of the Senate, in my opinion.
She would put Manchin. She'd give Manchin a run for his money. Let's put it that way.
They're up there together. Yeah.
Right. There was a point I wanted to make. What was it?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Damn it. It'll come to me. It was kind of important though. Do you remember what I was saying before? It'll come to me. The danger of live formats.
Mm-hmm. That she would give them a run.
Kamala Harris. Can I just get this out before I forget it again? Kamala Harris being in Washington proves the point that I would say about racism in the city's politics. There are plenty of opportunities for people of color within the context of white supremacy and racist systems. Clarence Thomas proves the point. You just have to serve capital. This is why Dr. King described capitalism and racism as intersecting with militarism. It's not a preclusion of opportunities. It's a gateway to opportunities. And San Francisco's very smugly self-assured liberal, white, progressive establishment is up to its neck in white supremacy that frankly refuses to acknowledge. It's been documented by the local black newspaper. It's been documented by the Marina Times, which is a relatively moderate voice. But, it's been striking to me as an immigrant without any wealth or capital, without a dynasty confronting an oligarch, the kind of profound bias in the press that I've been forced to confront and overcome. And it's all the more reason why I'm frankly grateful for the chance to be with you and to reconnect with your audience.
Did you get a chance to touch on that before you go? The Pelosi 2018 thing?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. Pelosi set up an incentive in the DCCC blacklist. This was a rule that forbid the party from offering jobs or contracts to anyone who had ever worked with someone like me, challenging an entrenched incumbent. So what that meant was, after I won the primary and we replaced some people on my team, people who weren't down with what we were doing, they had a very powerful incentive to rehabilitate themselves with the party. And so they constructed the handful of people who we'd replaced on our team, just a handful, orchestrated this very elaborate set of lies. They first found someone to accuse me of sexual harassment. They inflated that to sexual assault. They published that accusation. It remains uncorrected in a local newspaper, even though the people who wrote the article admitted that it was false to The Intercept. And then they stacked on top of that an equally false accusation that I'm a misogynist. One set of accusations played on a racial trope about men of color and sexual misconduct, another one on a religious trope about Muslim men and misogyny. And I do want to make this really clear. I was being falsely accused in the press of behavior that white, powerful politicians continue to conduct with impunity. I want to particularly just note Andrew Cuomo was taking a victory lap on CNN at the same time that everyone from the San Francisco Chronicle, who I'm currently suing in federal court to defend election integrity from their biased journalism, when the San Francisco Chronicle and Mission Local and 48 Hills were publishing orchestrated lies about me. Several of those publications, incidentally, were getting paid under the table by some of their sources. That's been reported by investigative journalists since. But at the same time that all that was happening, Andrew Cuomo's on CNN. And what do you call it when powerless brown-skinned immigrants are falsely accused of the behavior modeled by powerful, white, wealthy politicians? I think we have words for that. You could call that press bias. You could call that a failure of ethics. You might call that white supremacy. You could
I
just
call
call
it
that
disgusting. I don't know. But,
yeah, thank you. That's what I went through ultimately. And a bunch of people smearing me and whistleblowers, multiple whistleblowers came forward. And even though their voices have now been documented, they remain suppressed by every white journalist in San Francisco, with the exception of the black newspaper and one white woman who at the Marina Times, who's had the independence to cover what the entire ranks of the city's political class refuse to acknowledge, and that is the race of the Democratic Party. It's been reported on by the international press, but nowhere locally. And if I can just even make this like one step further, not only did the only things printed about me in the last 5 months of the 2020 race were those lies, but the policy record of the incumbent evades attention. So what hope does democracy have if powerful oligarchs can escape accountability for their decisions, wrapping themselves in cults of personality, ducking debates, smearing their opponents? And, you know, I hear people, you know, occasionally, usually Democrats will say something like, why is that guy still here? Didn't he already lose? I won 81,000 votes in spite of a racist character assassination in the middle of a pandemic against the wealthiest member of Congress, backed up by every figure in the press. Mm-hmm. I feel, frankly, I'm on fire, right? I mean, we scored more votes in this district and shifted more policies than anybody has since 1987 when this oligarch won the seat. Yeah. If the press showed up for work, I'd be in Congress already. And ultimately, I'm running not just against Pelosi and not just against the Democratic Party, but against the entire corporate establishment. And that includes the media, ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Can I say something real quick?
Yeah, please.
So I just want to say I'm so glad that you're doing this, and I really understand the
welcome to the show, Isla.
Hi, by the way. Hi, I'm Isla. I've been friends of the show for a long time, and I actually saw the same thing happen here in Colorado. I supported, she's an amazing progressive candidate. Her name is Lorena Garcia, and she had a long track record of really great statewide issue-based success. And consistently, the press would say, this is a race between these two white guys, basically. There were 12 candidates, and she was shaping the conversation. She'd bring up a policy issue, and suddenly they would bring it up, which in a certain way was great, right? Like she got to affect some of the conversation, but they weren't going to show up and follow through on it in the Senate, which they haven't. One of those guys won. And my friends would call me and they'd be like, I was listening to, CPR, Colorado Public Radio. Is Lorena still running? I'm like, yeah, yeah, she is. She's still running. She still has tons of support. She's doing really well, but they wouldn't cover her. They wouldn't cover other people too. And I was like, until the press actually, and they have this, it's so, I hate that whole like, oh, she's not electable. Yeah, of course she's not electable if nobody knows she's running because you don't cover her participation. Guess what? People will be electable when you actually talk about them and expose who they are. I mean, and I don't mean like the bad stuff, but just all of it. Show up, show who they are, and give people the chance to actually choose. But what you said is true. The press really fails us. And I think sometimes they do it because they're like, oh, they bought into that story, but I don't care. They are not giving people a chance. So that's why I love the show. And I love the people that Jason and Mikey bring on, because I feel like it gives me a sense of hope, because that's the other thing that we're combating, right? Like there are a lot of people doing really great work who want to build a power structure and an economy that actually works for everybody. But that's not getting highlighted because it doesn't serve the power structure that exists. It doesn't serve the corporate greed structure. So that gets suppressed, and it sucks because there is so much happening that's actually good and hopeful, and we don't hear about it. We don't have a chance even to support it or vote for it or connect to it. And so I think it's like the internet has its downsides, but this part I really love because we can actually claim that power and say, nope, we're doing this. We are here. We're here for each other.
Yeah.
Done. So there you go. That's my rant. And I'm so excited to get a chance to say hi to you and to meet you. And I love the way I just love what you guys do, Mikey and Jason, to bring people on. And it gives me a moment to be like, okay, things are going to get better here. We got people.
There's real people. There's real people in the world. And that's why I love Shahid, and I love like Lauren and, Lauren Hubbard and Brett Henrick and Alan Ellison, who've been on this show, and Jesse Felipe and Mike Ortega, and the list goes on and on and on. Darius Butler, like, and Shahid, we're going to give you a chance to say goodbye here in 1 second and give your closing thoughts. But like, this is the thing that fucking irritates the shit out of me relentlessly. Is Shahid made a super salient point earlier in the show about calling politicians out on their record. We don't have access to those motherfuckers, right? Like, we can get candidates on the show real fucking easy. Anyone who's in Congress, Democrat or not, will not come on this show or any other show within our, that's within range of us. Like, they'll go on the Breakfast Club. I'm not ragging on them. Like, they might go on TYT, you know, but
fight me,
gotta
Charlemagne. Fight me, Charlemagne the guy. Me versus you. What's up? What's up?
Right.
Add him on Twitter, guys.
It's they'll go on Jimmy Dore, right? That fake ass motherfucker. But then they don't get asked most of the time these questions because those people just want to have a cupcake and, you know, talk about rainbows and fuzzy bunnies and talk about how bad the opposition is. And like when we have a candidate who's fighting from the further left, like believe me, there's a part of the left that's too far, I think, where some people get a little bit weird, but
too far to you.
When you well, if you've seen some of these Ukraine conversations, but like, even when you get to what you would call the radical left, the ideas there are not that weird, right? They're sensible stuff that maybe you might say, okay, I'm not sure how we get there, but I like the end idea. And then the left, the mid left runs from that candidate, and they call them radical. But when the same thing happens on the right and they go super crazy on trans rights or super crazy on immigration or super crazy on Black Lives Matter, you know, or Blue Lives Matter, whatever the case may be, the right embraces the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Lauren Bobberts and the Jim Jordans of the world, right? And like they're their biggest fundraisers. But it's because of the moderate Democrat, they're afraid of the ideas that their actual party says in their platform that they're for, but they never push through.
Yes.
And it's like, that's why we lose. We have bad messaging, yes. But outside of that, it's really that, like, socialism is no more scarier than capitalism is. It's an economic system. People are what sucks. Right? People suck at the top of capitalist regimes. They suck at the top of socialist regimes. Like, I think
what you said right there? I heard you say that institutions suck because of people at the top. When I hear people, I don't think of institutions. I think of the people getting ground under the gears. But it's institutions that suck ultimately. And
institutions are a structure made of people, right? Yeah, so you know, but the people who seem to access those institutions, the tops of those institutions, are pretty historically bad. And you can go back to the Middle Ages to see examples of this. And it's like, where are the good people? And just, you know, you have Gandhi, a couple other good people, and, you know, that they get to the top of things. And then that's really about it. And it's super frustrating. And like, we on the left need to better embrace people who are in the dark, like Isla, who's in the dark.
I'm dog sitting, and so there's a lot of things I don't understand about this house, but I'm doing my best.
There's a ghost there. For those on the audio, Isla's lights just went up. But Shahid, we know you got to roll. You stayed longer than you said you were going to. Tell the people how they can find you, how they can support your campaign, and I come up that way once in a while. We got to grab a cup of coffee. I'm in Bakersfield, so
okay.
I have an office up in San Jose, so one of these days we got to grab a cup of Joe or a beer, whichever you like.
And a burrito while you're here. But yes,
a fucking burrito. Yes.
Burrito. I like it.
Folks can join us online. We're at shahidforchange.us. There's a short link to, you could just do shahid.fyi. We'll send you there. You can donate there. You can volunteer there. You can learn more about the platform and the issues. Feel free to share anything that you might find. We're on all the major social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Shahid for Change. And thank you again for the conversation. I appreciate it. And I would say maybe just on the last note, the point of frustration that you were raising, Jason, it's all the more reason why the voices like yours and everybody who's out there speaking truth to power matter, because there is ultimately a war going on, not just in Ukraine, but here in the United States. And it's a class war that's been happening here. And the American people have been getting fleeced by Wall Street and the Pentagon for too damn long. And I'm eager to do everything that I can as a champion of we the people of the United States to fight back. And I appreciate the chance to be with you today.
It was an honor to meet you.
We love you, brother.
Honor was mine. All right. We'll catch up again. Peace, y'all. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir. I like him.